Welcome to the Rant Live. So we were just mentioning that the Cubs are 43-64. So if you were tuning in to hear about the rest of the season, that might not be the best idea. Well, at least if you're interested in standings and playoffs and things like that. But we do have a lot of other cool stuff to talk about, like prospects, lots of prospects.
Well, there's lots of prospects. That's about all there is right now. But you know what? I was thinking about this because it was really weird. You know, the Cubs aren't very good. We know that. They lost 6 straight games, and then they went into this weekend series with the Marlins and won the first 2, and then got shut out in the third. And I was looking at it, I was like, they outside of the Contreras home run on Friday that took them to a win, and I know they shut the Marlins out the following day, but still between 3 games they only scored 6 runs. And I know the Marlins have pretty good pitchers and everything, but like the outside of again Contreras and Happ still being around and that providing a little bit of a cookie to the fans, I can't think of a time when I was less invested like over this weekend. And, I was following the games in the periphery. And part of that, they were afternoon games. We had some things going on. But it was so odd because I think I had built myself up so much to the inevitability of those guys being traded, being able to maybe showcase some different prospects, having a few more of those pitchers gone, and some different things. And so now it's like this weird, like the wins and losses don't matter, right? We already know that. Outside of maybe your enjoyment of that individual game. And it just, I don't know, it feels more hollow than even before the trade deadline when it already kind of felt weird, as it were. And so I'm struggling at this point to really just, I guess, connect with the big league product because it's just such a weird limbo right now, more so than it had been.
Yeah, I mean, if Happ and Contreras would have been traded, obviously that would have opened up 2 spots in the 40-man roster as well, and the active roster. So you would have had at least 2 more players. I mean, yeah, we did think that there were going to be a lot more players traded than actually ended up being traded. I think would they trade away 4 major league guys,
four right-hand relievers. That was what was weird. Like no Smiley, no Miley, no Happ, no Contreras, no Wisdom, no Ortega. Like, I mean, I easily could have seen them moving a good 5 or 6 more players.
And I meant to send you a private message, and unfortunately I had put it in the comments, but yeah, your mic is popping just a little. But yeah, and that's the thing is that we expected there to be kind of all these openings, and granted there are openings, but just not as many as we thought that there were going to be, which would have opened the door for some other guys that I think we want to see. Matt Mervis, I think, being the top one, which he's batting .288. He's got a .344 on base percentage in Iowa. I mean, his numbers have pretty much held steady at the different levels. He start out at South Bend, and then he moved to Tennessee, and now he's in Iowa. Kind of feels like it's an inevitability for him to get up to Chicago. And it just it's getting to the point where you have to start wondering why they're not making the move at this point, especially with Frank Schwindel just not being good.
Well, and that's the thing. It's not just Schwindel. Alfonso Rivas has not. I mean, he just got optioned back down, right? I mean, he's been kind of back and forth a couple times, and that was where the argument could be made, like, well, Rivas is a left-handed hitter, and so is Mervis, and that's where that comes from. I would also say, like, Alexander Canario is another one, and we brought that up a couple times. I bring that up primarily here because he was just named the organization's player of the month, minor league player of the month for July, and was also the Southern League player of the month there in Tennessee. Now, granted, he's only just a AA, but we've seen what Chris Morel has done, and Canario is already on the 40-man. So there's not, the only procedural move there is, I mean, that could be an injury replacement. That could be one of a number of different things. But The only thing I think is holding Mervis back right now is simply because they have all three of the pitchers they acquired in those trades, the guys you just mentioned, whether it's Hayden Wisniewski, Ben Brown, and then Raul. What's Raul? Saul. I mean, Saul
Yeah,
Gonzalez.
Saul Gonzalez. Yeah.
They all need to be added to the 40-man at the end of the season, or else be exposed to the Rule 5 draft. And so, and there's more, right? There's a lot of other guys throughout the system. I think that would be the only thing preventing them from the Mervis deal. Although, as you mentioned, there's plenty of guys throughout the system who are in that on that roster now who realistically, right, they don't have a future on that 40-man. And so I think that's the only thing stopping them right now with Mervis, is that they, had they made all these trades that we had expected, as you referenced earlier, that opens up all these spots. As it is, that's the whole thing, is they open up so few spots for them. Although, again, we'll see on some of these. It's what's interesting to me now is we're looking at guys like Mark Leiter Jr. and Adrian Sampson, who I think at the time they were both brought up the first time, or when they got signed, no one would have anticipated them actually being kind of like actual usable pitchers on a regular basis. Although I'm not nearly as sold on Sampson as what I think a lot of other people tend to be. We saw yesterday, it wasn't tremendous. It wasn't a horrible outing, right, in terms of kind of what you expect. But I've said for a while now that I'm like, the numbers don't quite match when you look at what he gives up in terms of the contact, in terms of getting a lot of fly balls, and he's limited home runs. Well, he gave up a couple in that 3-run outburst, and that really is what sunk the Cubs. Now, granted, 3 runs shouldn't beat you every game, but that is the thing that worries me a bit about him, is can he continue to limit the home runs to the extent that he has? But again, I also look at that and say, okay, are you, based on all the drafts, the draft picks they've made, and the trades, the guys they acquired there, and the development they're trying to push, are you comfortable just keeping around a few guys who are, for all intents and purposes, they're placeholders? I think they've done pretty well for a bad team, but are those the guys that you expect to carry you forward? I would say no, but a lot of that is going to depend on, right, organizationally, what they need to do from a procedural standpoint when it comes to keeping a lot of these guys around.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the 40-man roster, you can pretty much go up and down this roster and fairly easily figure out who doesn't belong. I mean, or who you could get rid of and still be okay, right? I mean, Rafael Ortega, he's not going to be around next year. Jason Hayward, they could cut him, right? They could DFA him. Who else is on here? Patrick Wisdom. I just don't see him as being a part of the future. Frank Schwindel. Zach McKinstry has been really bad. Like,
yeah,
his at-bats are bad.
Yeah, it's, you know what? So a couple things on that. For what was funny, watching Billy Hamilton yesterday was the other kind of interesting thing, because was it yesterday or was it Saturday? I think it was yesterday. We struck out 4 times. And he was such like the bane of the Cubs' existence when he was at the height of his powers in Cincinnati, and just running all over them, because it's basically like if he walked, it was a triple, right? Because he would just steal 2 bases on him. But JD was mentioning it yesterday with him in particular, although McKinstry could maybe fit into that, to where, it's almost on some of those days, it's not just striking out 3 times. Like, Hamilton looked totally overmatched at the plate every time. And it's like, he almost probably didn't even want to go out there for the 4th at bat, because it's like, I just don't have it today. I don't even want to go back out there. Give me a pinch hitter. But McKinstry has kind of felt like that. And, I think sometimes you see that. I would wager that the dude is pressing a little bit, that he saw this opportunity, and he's probably pushing too hard to get it, trying to prove himself, prove he belongs. If he gets the chance to kind of settle down and relax, I think he'll be okay. But I don't know. That sounds almost exactly like
really
what people
lost,
have been saying about. Yeah,
like
well, that's what people have been saying about Nick Madrigal the entire season, right? Well, now that he's finally healthy, now he'll okay.
He had 3 hits over the weekend, so it's like, and that was something that I wanted to mention is there's this, you see it mentioned now that he's finally healthy, like you just said, and it's like, do we really think that's going to be a game changer for Nick Madrigal? Like, just granted, I mean, we've seen him have spurts where he's gone, 2 or 3 games and looked okay, like he has over this weekend, but he still has no power whatsoever. He's not really that fast. And so here's a guy who I guess you're just relying to get on base, and hopefully he's got a high on base percentage. But short of that, he just doesn't have anything to offer. And I don't see really great defense from him. And I think that's what we were sold, right? Was that he was a great defensive player or had the ability to be one.
I was never sold that he was a great defensive player. I don't know who you may have clicked on one of those Facebook links to buy one of those weird off-brand second baseman. But I what we were sold, it was he was a great hitter, right? He's not an on-base guy so much because he doesn't walk a whole lot, but that he's gonna bat at a 300+ clip. He's going to put together really good at bat. I mean, Nicky two strikes, right? He gets down in the count and he just battles, sees a lot of pitches, forces hitters or pitchers into uncomfortable spots, and then will eventually come through with a little hit here and there. But his hits, his offense. I don't know where I'm pronouncing these words from, but he was sold as a very high contact guy. He gets his hits on, he doesn't have a ton of power. He's going to have to dink it in front of outfielders, which is primarily what we've seen, sneaking ground balls through the hole, stuff like that. But again, and I don't want to belabor it. We've talked about it before, but as defenses have adjusted and they're able to, if the outfielders don't have any fear of him hitting it over them, they'll just Jim Edmonds that thing and play so shallow that he can't hit it in front of them. And if he can't hit it in front of him and he doesn't have the power to get it over him, that's kind of the issue. Now, if he has continued, he was hurt most of last year. He's been injured a lot of this year. If he can be, my problem with him is not a problem with him. The problem with his spot in this lineup is that he's the kind of guy they should have had with the team last year or 2 years ago, right? That contact base hit guy in between some dudes who have a lot more power, but more swing and miss as well. And so now they've kind of flipped it because now they don't have a whole lot of power, right? And so they went with this kind of more contact heavy approach, but they've sacrificed power in order to do that. And I think it's the water has not yet found its level. It went from, it just skewed to the other side. I do think he's got value as a contact hitter who doesn't strike out, but that has to be a role-playing kind of a guy. That can't be one of the dudes who you're depending on to be in your lineup at the top every day.
And that's where I go with Nick Madrigal, though, is that this team is so far away from needing a role-playing guy. It feels like if you're looking at where the Cubs should be going, they need to be finding, the next core, right? I mean, that needs to be what they're focused on. And it's not to say let's forget about the contact guys and the role-playing guys altogether. You do want those guys in your system, but I'm more concerned about who's the next core than I am about who's the role-playing guy. You can't have a whole team full of role-playing guys and expect to compete at the major league level. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, well, and he and Wisdom are essentially two sides of the same role player coin, right? One of them is the contact guy who you want to have in there, as mentioned in the comments here. That quote unquote second leadoff, the guy batting 8th or 9th in the order. And then Wisdom is sort of that dude who I'd love to see batting 6th or 7th or something like that, like down in there with that little extra bit of pop. You don't need him to get on base, or you have those two kind of batting together in there somehow, right? And they both fit well with, if you have that core, if you have those primary players, and hey, here's the dude whose job is to supply power, here's the dude whose job is to supply that contact bat and balance things out a little bit elsewhere. The problem is they don't have enough of that elsewhere that these guys are providing any balance. And so, it's kind of, as I mentioned, you're adding too much weight to the scale on one side or the other, and you have now an imbalance, and it just doesn't really work. And again, to be fair to Madrigal, he has been hurt for a lot of it, but His defense has left a lot to be desired, as has Wisdom's. That's another issue entirely. Is now you're talking about we're really narrowing the scope of production and value for these guys. It was like when you're pretty much only supplying power or you're only supplying a contact bat, like it doesn't really work out real well. Look at Andrelton Simmons. That dude didn't strike out much. He didn't hit much either.
That's over. Yeah, at least he's been DFA'd.
The Cubs have players who have no value.
Yeah, the Cubs have made some moves that I can't agree with, such as DFAing VR and Simmons. At least it seems like they're moving in the right direction there. I don't know. It's just when I look at the middle infield, I'm thinking Chase Strumpf, Triantos, Morel, Preciado, Made. Those are the guys. Now, granted, they're all young, not all of them, but most of them. I mean, Morel is up there, but I don't think Morel is going to end up in center field.
No.
To me, it feels like he's much more suited to be in the infield and probably at second base with Nico Mann and shortstop. And then with Matt Mervis, I mean, if that move gets made soon, it's just, I'm not sure what the hesitancy is there on the Cubs' part, but like you said, I mean, obviously he's not on the 40-man roster, but you talk about, I mean, David Bodie, how long is he going to continue to be on the 40-man roster? I mean, he's just been sent down to Iowa. You feel like him and Schwindel are kind of the next to drop here.
Yeah. And I mean, hey, Bodie, and I don't remember if we talked about it. Like, Bodie has gotten more mileage out of like 2 home runs than any other player. I think like the perception of him among a not insignificant number of people, right? Like there are a lot of Cubs fans still who think David Bodie is like a really, really good player, like borderline everyday starter type of guy. They really, truly believe that. And I look, again, he's a great dude from all accounts that I've seen. And his story is such like I don't know how many people know this, but like he was about to be cut by the organization before the trade. I think it was before the Chapman trade, right? Because that sent Billy McKinney and Gleyber Torres out. They were at Myrtle Beach at the time. Like, I don't know if he was going to get cut. Bodie was about to quit. That's what it was. He was about to retire. He was on the verge of retiring from baseball, but that trade took a couple of guys who've been playing on the infield, moved them out of the Cubs organization. All of a sudden, Bodie becomes an everyday player at Myrtle Beach, which was high A at the time. And then, he worked his way up and the rest is history, right? So, I mean, kudos to him and hell of a job by him and his agent for actively approaching the Cubs on that extension, right? Because the dude locked in the kind of money that he certainly would not be making had he retired from baseball 4 or 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Geez.
5 year, $16 million deal.
In A-ball. Yeah. So, I mean, great on that. But the problem is you just mentioned a bunch of players at second base, at third base, with some outfield possibilities and a bunch of dudes coming up. There simply isn't room on the roster. Well, clearly, I mean, he got optioned. There's definitely not room on the active roster. And that's on a bad team, mind you. Like, he fit well. Again, he was great because he could play a couple positions. He could pick it pretty well at third, play a little second base, and fill in for other guys. But that spot simply isn't there anymore. And I think the Cubs have, when we look at the value of those roster spots, there's a great deal more that's tied up in it. Again, I mean, people are like, why would they DFA Hayward? They're paying too much money. Yeah, no, they are paying him too much money to do nothing. I'm still convinced that this is not purely a matter of his knee actually won't allow him to play. Try to convince me otherwise, I guess. I don't know that I would believe you, but that roster spot is simply too valuable right now, given some of the guys are going to have on that crunch, to keep giving it to somebody who simply is not going to contribute to the team any longer. And that's tough. Like, I'm not saying that lightly when I speak, especially, I've got a lot of good things to say about Hayward as a person and David Bodie as a person, but as far as baseball players on this team as it moves forward, I'm just not sure how they can justify keeping them on a 40-man spot.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing is that you look at kind of the phases of talent in the minor league system, And it's like there's clearly a level of talent that's probably the top level of talent within the organization that is about an average about 19 years old, right? And these are guys that you're probably not going to see for 2 to 3 years, and there's a whole lot of them. And then when you go kind of to the next level up, which would be kind of the 22, 23, 24 plus year old guys, which would be guys that you would expect to be more major league ready, that's where it gets a little more dicey in terms of what does the future look like for the Cubs. I mean, you can look at their current roster, but they just wanted to trade Ian Happ and Wilson Contreras, couldn't, but will likely end up losing Contreras. I mean, there's a lot of things. It's just when you start looking at the next 2 to 3 years, if the Cubs don't start making some type of move or don't sign free agents in the offseason, then it's going to be tough. But this is not a bad team. I mean, we've seen some really bad teams as Cubs fans, and this is not a team where you look at them and you're like, God, they're just awful. Like, I mean, it was that way. I think when VR was playing on the infield, there were definitely some moments where you were just like, this is terrible baseball. But we're not seeing terrible baseball. I mean, we're not. And so it's with this team, it just feels like a couple more pieces can be added, a couple decisions can be made, and you're real close. I mean, if you look at pitchers, you've got Killian. I mean, it's possible that we could see Jordan Wicks at some point within the next year or so. Wisniewski is right there. We should see him this year.
As long as he pitches better than that first outing, woof.
Yeah,
but obviously that's one. Ben Brown looked really freaking good, though.
Yeah, Ben Brown.
Ooh,
so you've got some, and hers, and so these are guys that we could see next year, and so or later this year, and so that's where you start looking at the 40-man and where the crunch is on the 40-man, and there's a whole bunch of players that you don't have to hold on to, I mean, you just picked up Kervin Castro. We'll see what happens with him, but he certainly didn't look good in his first outing.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's also, there's some merit to the idea that, as Jed Hoyer talks about it with prospect currency, and we've seen that, and that there's a point at which, right, one decision is rather than whether or not to place a guy on the 40-man roster, it's, well, do you sign a big-time free agent or do you swing a trade for a controllable starter, something like that, right, to where you're willing to part with 2 or 3 of your prospects in order to get one guy who's going to help solidify that rotation, and then a little bit better who you've got coming up. Because, I mean, right now, right, we could project next year's as Stroman, Hendricks, Steele, and Thompson. There's 4 guys right there. Right now, that is that 5th spot. Is that Wisniewski? Is that Hers? Is that Mills? Killian? Yeah, Wicks. Right. There's a bunch of people that could fit in there. Although, if we look at it too, and this is a weird year for the Cubs. They've had a ton of injuries, but we're not very far out from looking at more of a 6-man rotation or the potential to have piggyback starters and that kind of thing. So I don't think limiting it to 5 is very important there. But, you've got some guys who were some big-time free agents. I'm pretty sure Alzolay, that got mentioned in here. I think Adbert Alzolay is done as a starter. I don't believe we see him as a full-time starter again. Certainly this year, if he's able to come back, we'll see him in the bullpen. But we saw some of that last year as well. He ended up doing so well as a starter that they got away from their initial strategy, which was to use him as more of a swingman and to kind of limit his innings that way. But if you look at his total injury history and just kind of the workload that he's really ever been able to accumulate, I just feel like he sets up better and his stuff plays better out of the pen. That's been my belief for a while now.
He's the kind of guy you want to bring in the 7th, 8th inning.
Yeah, and if you can use him again, if it's in a piggyback type of role, right? If you kind of pair up a couple of those guys, but I think there's the potential too, and we've seen this with a lot of guys who, as they come up, who don't come up as a starter, who come up initially to a strong team, David Price comes to mind. I'm pretty sure DeGrom in his initial days was working as a reliever or in and out, right? Because you have this very strong rotation, or at least a solid one with veterans that you can bring some of these guys in, let them learn the ropes, so to speak, in that bullpen mix, and that gives you the best of both worlds, right? You're able to give these guys experience and bring them along without having to throw them right into the deep end in a regular starting role. So I would like to see the Cubs go and do that. There's a lot of things I'd like to see them do, but I do believe, right, we're seeing a lot of momentum on the development side, pitching wise, and they've got a lot of these guys who all of a sudden the top 30 is populated, and even the top 10 is more heavily populated now by pitchers than what it was 2 weeks ago. And I think that'll continue to be the case. So, now it's a matter of them producing at the big league level. I know they've tweaked a couple of things with Killian, right? So I will see, but it really, like, you've got to sign a couple guys and lock those spots in. So now all right, we're not waiting on one of 3 different shortstops to come up and be the man there. We're not waiting on one of 6 different starting pitchers to come up and take a role. Like, give that role to somebody who is established. Go pay some big money for somebody, put them in there, and then that helps you to figure out the rest of your decisions along the way. Versus like, well, we'll just let them figure it out. I don't like that, but that's what it feels like we're seeing so far.
Yeah, just kind of like, set it on autopilot and see what happens type of situation, which isn't always that fun. And so it is a little tough to kind of envision exactly what the future looks like, especially after the trade deadline and not really knowing what's going to happen, kind of with those Wilson Contreras and Ian Happ.
Mm-hmm.
Ian Happ, obviously, he's going to be on the team next year because he's still got one more year on his contract. But he will be a free agent in 2024. But and Wilson Contreras has been tearing it up, since the trade deadline. I don't have his numbers right here in front of me, but I know he's been, I think he was like the named by Marquee as the player of the series or something like that. He scored half of the Cubs total runs.
Yeah.
In the series at least, or more. And so this is a guy that, to me, it just feels like you want to keep him on the team as a leader. And I think he's really showing. Do you think ownership is seeing Wilson Contreras after the trade deadline, seeing the reception that he's getting? Is any of this like kind of opening their eyes and making them think differently about Wilson Contreras? Or do you think he's still kind of a guy they look at as not part of the future for the Cubs?
I don't think anything would have changed their perception of him, based on the welcome that he got, the way the fans are seeing that. I mean, hell, if nothing of the last 2 years in general has taught them that, nothing will, right, about any of these guys. But I do believe that a confluence of circumstances could make an extension or a deal in free agency more attractive to both sides, just based on the reality of it, right? Again, with the kind of production he provides, with the fact that, again, his market was not as robust, one way or the other, whether it's just the Mets being scared or stupid or what, and they weren't the only potential team. And I mean, the Padres were out of it when they swung that huge Soto trade. And I think we knew the Rays aren't going to go out there and just blow things up and go wild on a trade. But, I do think there is some skepticism in terms of his abilities as a catcher and a game caller, for that pitching staff. I think when you look at something like, the qualifying offer and what that will do to his market, just a variety of things. And again, as I've brought up a few times, look at how often the Cubs are using him as a DH. And part of that, I know he tweaked his hammy a little bit, and so there's a bunch of things, they want to keep him fresh, blah blah blah. But does his production really matter at this point for them? It's not like they're trying to win, and so I think there's a number
They're
of
definitely
factors,
not trying to win.
No, that suppress his value a little, and so then if you get back to it, as we had said on here, right, it's not like he's going to come back and take some massive discount to play for the Cubs. If somebody else is offering him $100 million and the Cubs are at 80, I don't think that's or less, right? I don't think that's something that gets it done. But, some people had mentioned, I mean, the qualifying offer should be around $20 million. It's entirely possible they tag him with it. He accepts it and then works something out with the deal. Yeah, I mean, they
if they don't, then that's just the biggest failure I've ever seen.
Right, because then they do have nothing if he leaves, And the thing is, while I don't like it for him because it does decrease his value on the open market as a free agent, a move like that significantly increases the chances that the Cubs could retain him one way or the other, because that kind of AAV, he's not going to want just a 1-year deal, because that just makes no sense for him at that age, because now you're going to go back in a year older but maybe he works out a shorter deal with some opt-outs or things like that.
He has an injury history. I mean, he hasn't really had any injuries this year, but the last couple of years he's fought injuries.
Well, and he did tweak the hamstring though, and that's an issue he's had in the past. And so, it didn't put him on the IL, but it did kind of he sat out a couple games there, and I do think that's part of the DH thing and taking it a little easier there. So, I believe this is not purely about the Cubs trying to manage his workload to keep his bat at peak performance. I really, really do think there is something here to where, whether they are trying to bring his potential value down in terms of what they would offer him in a contract, whether it is a matter of getting him used to the idea that, hey, dude, over the course of the rest of your career, you're going to be a DH at a greater frequency than you are catching, right? That's simply how it's going to work, even with an electronic strike zone, right? Because people want to talk about framing with catchers, and that's not the only thing about it. You know what I mean? That's not all there is to it. Nor is just throwing a great back pick every once in a while. So,
I mean, you've got to be able to call a game, right?
Yeah, and what did we just talk about that the Cubs are really trying to do? Develop pitchers and work with him on this. A lot of this comes down to it, maybe not just other teams valuing or devaluing Contreras based on his game calling skills, game management skills. The Cubs themselves might very well be looking at that when they're talking about all these guys are bringing up through the system and all the work they've done in evaluating and developing pitchers, and saying, asking themselves, do we believe Wilson Contreras is the right catcher to help us kind of usher in this new era of homegrown pitchers that we've not experienced? He hadn't had to worry about that for the last 10 years.
But Wilson Contreras is a converted catcher, and he was converted to catcher by the Chicago Cubs. It kind of feels like the Cubs kind of brought this on themselves, right? I mean,
oh yeah,
I'm not really sure why they converted him to catcher. Maybe but
because they needed catchers, and he wasn't cutting it in the infield. I guess he's got that strong arm, and I mean there were I think of a variety, and he has tons of energy. Yeah, super athletic.
Yeah, he's played really well. I mean, I remember that throw from a couple years ago when he was playing in left field, and he was like all the way up against the wall, and he just threw an arrow dart straight to home and gunned out somebody. But it was one of the most impressive throws I've ever seen from the outfield from a Major League Baseball player. So, I mean, the guy's got a gun. He could definitely play the outfield. But, I mean, at this point, it's like you look at the outfield prospects that the Cubs have, and that's not where they need players. That's for sure. And so, yeah, it'll be very interesting to see kind of how he fits in and how this all plays out in the offseason. So, but it's like the offseason can't get here quickly enough. We got August 8th. We have 2 more months. The Cubs actually play baseball in October this year. So not because they're in the playoffs, but because the
lockout pushed everything back a little bit. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Hey-o,
so they will
October
be
baseball.
playing.
Yay.
They will be playing in October against the Reds. So, I mean, maybe it'll be competitive.
Hey, the Cubs and the Reds, not only are they playing in October, they're playing in the Field of Dreams game in the
5
showcase.
Games.
Yeah, that's
the showcase is coming on Thursday.
Yeah, they dropped the uniforms and the hats and everything.
They did.
What do you think about? I like the hats, but what do you think about the uniforms, the jerseys and such?
Well, I think it's funny. I like the Cubs jerseys, but the thing is that they're basically the same C logo as the Reds.
Yeah.
It's like the same.
I was looking at that. I was like, well, this is kind of weird. Like they almost.
So
I was like, wait, what?
Would have been better maybe if they weren't playing the Reds. But I mean, I love all the Cubs older jerseys. By the way, there's a link in this post if you're on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube to those jerseys if you guys want to check those out. And the hats, they're pretty sweet. But I like them. I mean, how can you not like the older Cubs jerseys? I mean, all their logos from there's really not many that I've seen that I don't like. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I don't mind them. I mean, I think it's a pretty cool look. I like the hats in particular. I really like the old school bear holding the bat. I think they're wearing more of the navy color for the game, if I'm not mistaken. But I know there's more of a royal option that is out there that I personally prefer. I like how that I understand like the staying a little bit more old school with the navy or whatever. I like the royal myself, but no, I mean it's perfectly fine. If a bit expensive in terms of just what they want to charge for jerseys and hats. Although I think
it's like those hats are like $55 now.
Yeah, I think, and I don't want to take money out of our own pockets if somebody wants to go and buy one through Sports World through our link there. More than willing to take our percentage of that little cut there. But I did see somebody say that like Dick's Sporting Goods is selling them for $35 or something like that. So, maybe you can find a discount code or get some free shipping somehow. I don't know. So check that out. But
yeah, the MLB shop does have free shipping, and I threw a link out on our Twitter and Facebook to the MLB shop as well. So same type of thing would help us. Give us a little bit of a commission. Doesn't cost you any more to buy it, but yeah, they're good stuff.
Yeah,
I like it. I'm going to dig the game. It's going to be hopefully it'll be enjoyable. I mean, at least they're playing the Reds. Listen, if you look at the schedule coming up, it's like you just enjoy the next few games because they're against opponents that the Cubs should be fairly competitive against. I mean, the Nationals, against the Nationals at Wrigley, and then they play the Field of Dreams game in Iowa on Thursday, and then 2 away at Cincinnati, and then 3 away at the Nationals, a makeup of Baltimore at Baltimore game. And then it gets a little dicey. You've got 3 against the Brewers, 5 against the Cardinals, and a double header from a rescheduled game earlier in the season. 3 against the Brewers away, 3 against the Blue Jays, and then 3 against the Cardinals. So that's probably going to be a pretty tough stretch, I would imagine. I don't expect there to be a lot of winning, and it'll be real interesting to see how the Cubs play against the Nationals. But the Nationals are they have the worst record in baseball right now, right?
Yeah, by 5.5 games. And that's only the last few of those have been without Juan Soto and Josh Bell. So they were the worst team in baseball with those guys. Then they traded them away, got prospects in return who aren't impacting the major league club right now. They are a very, very bad team. So, which is really wild. I mean, when you look at the dudes, look at the list of players. I mean, we talk like Max Scherzer and Bryce Harper and Juan Soto and Anthony Rendon, Trey Turner, right? The guys that they've either traded away or allowed to leave. The amount of talented players they had on that team that they no longer have, it's pretty impressive. I mean,
well, and they were different than the Cubs. I mean, with the Cubs, they rode out their talent until they had to get rid of them where their contracts were coming up. I mean, the way the Nationals have done it, it's just been funky. They didn't get anything for Harper, right?
Right. They got nothing. They let him walk. They traded Soto. They traded Scherzer and Turner out to L.A. And Rendon, he left in free agency. Right? Yep. So there, and that kind of, if you look at the production afterwards, it kind of makes sense. But the fact, like, if you look at like those lists of, most career WAR or whatever, like through age 24, like 2 of the top 4 guys on that list or something like that are Bryce Harper and Juan Soto, and the Nationals had both of them on the same team. for a small period there, when Soto was a rookie. Now, the funny thing about that is people look at it and like, see, they let Harper walk and then they won a World Series. And now what, dude? Like, I mean, they're worse. They're far worse than the Cubs. And I don't know, does that trade help their timeline?
And a lot of that is because their system is so bad. I mean, they've got one of the worst systems in all of baseball. Now, obviously, it's just improved with the Soto trade, but it's still not that great.
Yeah. Well, it depends. I guess it depends on where you look. I think that's what I was looking at. I put out something today where it has the Cubs ranked 18th in Major League Baseball in terms of the future value projections of, if you take Fangraphs projections, for the certain scouting grade applied to that prospect and how much money that's supposed to be worth, blah, blah, blah. The Cubs are 18th in that group. And I think, and this is what I wrote in there too, I think there's only so much you can take away from it. First of all, because it's not a real measurement, right? It's based on a future valuation on a number that's there now. But I do think where the Cubs, we spend a lot of time talking about their prospects, but they don't truly have a big number. I mean, they've got some top 100 guys, right? But when you start looking at it, you're like, okay, well, Brendan Davis is hurt. We haven't seen him, or not hurt, but he still hasn't come back from the procedure yet. One of their former top prospects, Braylon Marquez, done for the season, hadn't played in forever. Another one of their former top prospects, Miguel Amaya, just started coming back, but he's not catching yet. And so I think a lot of people look at that, and this might sound weird, but the depth is almost a detriment to some evaluators because they don't look at that. And I think the Cubs, if you see somebody rank the Cubs anywhere toward the middle of the pack or the back half, I think they're grossly undervaluing, I guess. I don't want to say overvaluing the lack of kind of major elite top talent. But I think the Cubs have a lot more depth than maybe what really shines through if you're looking at just a top 30 list or something like that. Because, I mean, they've got some stud pitchers. We mentioned all those names, you went through. We haven't mentioned Luke Little yet, who was the organization's pitcher of the month for July. 6'8" Luke Little, the guy was throwing 105 and routinely hitting triple digits from the left side. He has looked really, really good, and he's all the way down at Myrtle Beach. Could be another fast riser. So I just think there are a lot of guys they have that we don't have the same separation as we saw with Chris Bryant and Javier Baez when you were like, okay, it's these two and then everybody else in the system. For a certain time there, 2014-ish. 15 at the start.
But those guys were also kind of more major league ready guys, right?
Right.
And I think that's the real problem, which is what we were talking about just a little bit ago, is that you just don't have that. You've got the level at the 19 kind of 18-year-old level, but then you just don't have really high ranked prospects at the 22, 23, 24-year-old level. There's just not a lot of those guys. And it felt like maybe the Cubs were going to try to, when they were thinking about trading Wilson Contreras and Ian Happ, my guess is that they were going to try to get some of those guys because that's really where they're lacking. And so they're either going to have to trade some of the younger prospects to get those major league ready guys, or it's like that's where it's kind of cloudy for me, is like, how do the Cubs go forward? I think they could have a competitive team next season for sure. I think they could be very close to 500 just based on the pitchers that they've got. They do have some strong pitchers that are coming up and should be there, like we mentioned. But it's just, I don't know where they're going to get the offense from.
Yeah, I mean, unless I think that's where they've got to make some free agency moves. They have a bunch of guys, like you said, they've got a bunch of them coming up, but what do we count outside of, hey, Mervis just hit a 3-run homer yesterday. He's got like 93 RBIs in the season. I mean, again, you look at that, like what Owen Casey, he's a couple years out. Pete Crow Armstrong, maybe next year, but you still don't count on him as well as he's been hitting this year. You're not counting on him to provide that offensive spark, right? He's still going to be, the defense is his carrying trait, and anything he provides offensively, I think above average is gravy. That's how I'd look at that. I'm not saying don't expect him to be a good hitter. I'm saying that the Cubs are not counting on that. They're not relying on him being an offensive force in terms of him coming up. Miguel Amaya has been hitting the cover off the ball, but again, he's also primarily a defense first guy. So lots of things there.
And that's something to take note of, right? Is the guys who were the top prospects for a while, Marquez, Amaya, Alzolay, look at the challenges that they've faced. And that just goes to tell you a whole lot about what happens with prospects. You can have as many prospects as you want, but getting them to the major league level is a completely different story. And a lot of times you're just going to run into some challenges, whether it be with injuries, whether it be with performance, whether it be with handling the next level or whatever it is. And so, if you look at, if you wanted to lay out all the Cubs, top 30 prospects, the chances of those guys being really successful at the major league level is still really low, and I mean, that's just the deal with prospects, is you just never know. And so it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, but I'm concerned for next year. I feel like the Cubs could be good. I think you're right. I think if they sign 2 or 3 really talented free agents, then I think the Cubs could be right there. And they're in a division that's just not that great. With the Cardinals are good because they've got 2 good players, and that just goes to show you what signing 2 really talented guys can do for your organization. I mean, now Arenado and Goldschmidt, guys like that typically aren't available, that often. And when they are and they come around, you have to sign them. You've got to bring them on your team. The Cardinals are really good at doing that. I hate to say that, but
especially when you don't have to give up crap to get them. Like they got the Rockies to pay him $50 million along with the guys they sent to take Arenado. I mean, it was like the Rockies just gave him away. That's a part that's kind of tough, but yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. So you got to be better at that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No comment. So the Cubs, couple games, 3 games against the Nationals. I think, what are you looking for in this National series? I mean, really the Cubs should sweep the Nationals, right?
I mean, everybody should sweep the Nationals, but right?
Everybody.
They are that bad, but I think again, there's not.
They got Anibal Sanchez pitching tonight.
Yeah, I just don't really care. Like, I don't know that there's anything I'm looking for much. I mean, I guess continuing some of the same trends we've seen. Does I want to see Nico Horner continue to do some things. We talked about Madrigal. Hey, it'd be great for him to maybe take advantage of some of this terrible pitching. I want to see Justin Steele go out there and shove. I wrote a little bit about that. I won't get into it here, but some things that I think he could tweak a little bit. And I think sometimes it's nice to face a really bad team, especially if you can tune up on them and carry a little bit more confidence in with some things. I want to see that continue. So, yeah, I just want to watch him play well. Now it doesn't really matter, but it's a hell of a lot more enjoyable if you can watch a team actually win baseball games. So that's nice. I'd like to see him score a bunch of runs. I don't want to see like 2-1. That would be nice. So.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Keegan Thompson, Marcus Stroman, and Justin Steele, a 3.48 ERA, a 4 ERA, and a 3.67 ERA. I mean, if you didn't know anything about the Cubs and you saw those 3 pitchers going back to back to back, you're thinking you've got a pretty good team here. Justin Steele's got a 3.67 ERA, but he's 4-7.
Yeah.
I mean, the future is very bright for the Cubs pitchers. Justin Steele, Keegan Thompson, Marcus Stroman's good. I mean, just those 3 guys, and then you throw in Kyle Hendricks in there, and a number of other guys like we were talking about. That's where I start to get excited about what next year could look like if you don't have the injuries that you had this year. It could be very interesting from a pitching perspective. And then you just need a little bit of offense, right? And so, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
But anyways, well, it's been real. A Monday show. We'll circle back. Let's circle back before the Thursday game. Maybe Thursday during the day, we'll be able to assess what happened between the Cubs and the Nationals, which, once again, hoping for a sweep. So what do you think? Are you predicting a sweep? If you had to,
2
We
out
haven't
of
done
3.
this for a while.
Yeah, 2
2
out
out
of
of
3.
3.
Yeah.
Is that just
Yeah,
because
the Nats will, it's, the Cubs can't seem to sweep anybody. I know
now
they
the Nats
have.
offense is bad?
The Nats are very, very bad. I just feel like this is one of those where they manage to mistake their way into a win somehow. Like something stupid
Like
happens,
an
and
error and
or like it
something.
like a couple errors, and then it steamrolls into a bad inning, and they manage to run away with it somehow. So I feel like the Cubs are good at kind of pissing away a game when they shouldn't.
I can't disagree with that. So I'm going to go with you on the 2 out of 3.
Sounds good to
there
me.
you have it. Well, thanks for joining us, everyone. Please join us again on the next show on Thursday. And until then, have a good one.
See ya.